The neuroscience of self. What happens when your brain realizes you don't exist? Here's something that's going to mess with your head for the next 10 minutes. Right now, as you're listening to this, there's a collection of neurons firing in your skull that's absolutely convinced it's you. It has memories, preferences, fears, dreams. It feels like the center of your universe. But what if I told you that 2,500 years ago, a man figured out something neuroscientists are only now confirming, that the thing you call you is actually a spectacular illusion, and the moment you see through it, everything changes? I'm not talking about some mystical mumbo-jumbo here. I'm talking about a testable, observable phenomenon that happens in your brain every single moment. And the wild part? Once you understand the mechanism behind this illusion, you can't unsee it. Your anxiety shifts, your suffering transforms, your entire relationship with yourself fundamentally changes. Stay with me, because we're about to explore what modern neuroscience calls the narrative self, what psychologists call ego construction, and what one brilliant observer 25 centuries ago called the Five Aggregates. And by the end of this, you're going to understand why the solution to most of your suffering isn't fixing yourself. It's seeing through the fundamental mistake of believing there's a solid, permanent self that needs fixing in the first place. The neuroscience revolution. Let's start with something concrete. Your brain right now is consuming about 20% of your body's energy, and a massive chunk of that energy is devoted to a single task: creating and maintaining the story of you. Neuroscientist Gazzaniga discovered something remarkable when studying split brain patients, people who've had the connection between their brain hemispheres severed. The left hemisphere, when presented with information it couldn't possibly have known about, would instantly fabricate explanations to maintain narrative coherence. It wouldn't say, "I don't know." It would make up stories, confabulate, construct meaning out of nothing. This isn't a bug in damaged brains, it's a feature of all brains. Your brain is a meaning-making machine that's constantly weaving disconnected experiences into a coherent narrative with you as the protagonist. And here's the kicker. This process is so seamless, so automatic, that you've never once questioned whether the narrator is real. Think about your body for a second. You probably believe you've had the same body your entire life, right? Wrong. The lining of your stomach replaces itself every few days. Your skin cells turn over completely every few weeks. Even your skeleton, which feels so permanent, replaces itself entirely every decade or so. The atoms that make up what you call your body right now, most of them weren't there a year ago. They're borrowed from your food, your water, the air you breathe. You're more like a whirlpool in a river than a rock, a temporary pattern in flowing matter, not a fixed thing. But your brain edits all this out. It creates continuity where there is none. It takes snapshots of a constantly changing process and stitches them into a movie with a single star: you. The pattern recognition problem. Now, let's talk about how your brain actually constructs this sense of self, because this is where it gets really interesting. Your brain operates on pattern recognition. It's constantly trying to predict what's going to happen next based on what happened before. This is hugely valuable for survival. It's why you can catch a ball, why you don't have to consciously think about every step when you walk, why you can have a conversation without planning every word. But here's the problem. Your brain applies this same pattern recognition machinery to your internal experience. It notices that there's a body here, sensations arising, thoughts appearing, emotions flowing. And because evolution wired your brain to find patterns and create explanations, it generates a narrative. There's a me experiencing all this. This is what cognitive scientists call the self model, a simulation your brain runs to create the feeling of being a unified, continuous entity. But it's a simulation, a very convincing one, granted, but a simulation nonetheless. And like all simulations, it's only as real as the processing power running it. Turn off the power through deep sleep, anesthesia, or certain meditative states, and the self disappears completely. Then when the brain boots back up, it recreates the simulation so seamlessly you never notice the gap. Recent research using brain imaging has shown something fascinating. There's no single self-center in the brain. When neuroscientists look for the neural correlates of self-awareness, they find a distributed network of regions all talking to each other. The default mode network, the anterior cingulate cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, the temporoparietal junction. All these areas light up when you're thinking about yourself, but none of them is you. They're just parts of the machinery generating the experience of being you. It's like asking where the dance is when a group of people are dancing together. The dance isn't in any single person, it's in the coordinated movement, the relationship, the pattern. Remove any individual dancer and the dance continues, just differently. The self is like that. It's not a thing, it's a process, an ongoing construction project that never quite finishes because it never actually builds anything solid. The aggregation principle. So if the self isn't a thing, what is it? This is where ancient insight and modern science converge in a really beautiful way. The Buddha, through nothing but careful observation of his own mind, identified what he called 5 aggregates. 5 categories of experience that, when operating together, create the illusion of a unified self. Modern neuroscience and psychology have basically rediscovered these same categories using different language. Let's break them down in a way that connects the ancient framework with contemporary understanding. First, there's physical form, your body, your brain, the material substrate of experience. Neuroscience calls this embodied cognition. Your sense of having a body isn't just about proprioception, it's actively constructed by your brain. Oliver Sacks documented cases of people who lost this sense, who couldn't feel their bodies existed at all, even though they could see them. The body you experience is as much a neural construction as it is a physical reality. Second, there's feeling tone, the automatic precognitive sense of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that arises with every experience. Neuroscientists call this valence, and it's generated by ancient structures in your brain like the amygdala and the ventral striatum. This happens before conscious thought. You don't decide whether something feels good or bad. Your brain makes that determination in milliseconds and then presents it to consciousness as a fait accompli. Third, there's perception, the process of interpreting raw sensory data. This is where your brain's predictive processing really shines. Neuroscientist Anil Seth has shown that perception is less about passively receiving information and more about active prediction. Your brain is constantly generating hypotheses about what's out there, then checking incoming sensory data against those predictions. What you experience as seeing or hearing is actually your brain's best guess about reality, constrained but not determined by sensory input. Fourth, there are mental formations, the habits, tendencies, patterns of thinking and reacting that feel like your personality. In neuroscience, these are called schemas or heuristics. They're essentially worn paths in your neural network, connections that have been strengthened through repeated use. When you say, "I'm an anxious person," or "I'm not good with numbers," you're describing these patterns as if they're permanent features of your identity. But they're just well-established neural pathways that can and do change with new experiences and deliberate practice. Fifth, there's consciousness itself, the basic awareness of experience. This is still the hard problem in neuroscience, but what's becoming clear is that consciousness isn't a single unified thing. It's more like a constantly updating stream of discrete moments of awareness, each slightly different from the last, creating the illusion of continuity through their rapid succession. Like frames in a movie appearing so fast they seem to flow into smooth motion. Here's what's crucial. None of these 5 categories is stable. None of them is controllable in any absolute sense, and most importantly, none of them is you. They're processes happening, not properties of a permanent entity. Your brain just happens to bundle them together and slap a label on the bundle. This is me. The suffering equation. Now we get to the part that really matters. Why does any of this matter for your actual life? Because here's the thing, once you understand that the self is a construction, you can start to see how suffering arises from a very specific mistake, trying to defend, improve, and preserve something that doesn't exist in the way you think it does. Let's get practical. Think about the last time you felt insulted. Someone said something and you felt hurt. What actually happened? Sound waves hit your eardrums. Your brain processed those sounds into words, matched them against your self-concept, detected a threat to that self-concept, and triggered a cascade of stress responses. Your heart rate increased, cortisol flooded your system, your thoughts started spinning, probably rehearsing what you should have said or planning what you'll say next time. But here's the question. Who got insulted? Your body? No, the body just experienced some biochemical changes. Your thoughts? No, thoughts just arose in response to conditions. Your feelings? No, feelings just came and went like they always do. What got hurt was the story your brain tells about who you are. The self-concept, the narrative, the simulation. Something that exists only in neural processing got threatened and your entire organism mobilized to defend it. This is the suffering equation. Identification plus impermanence equals suffering. You identify with something, your body, your feelings, your thoughts, your personality, your consciousness, and then reality does what it always does. It changes. The body ages, feelings shift, thoughts come and go, personality evolves, consciousness flickers. And each change feels like a personal threat because you've mistaken these changing processes for a permanent you. Psychologists call this ego threat, and the research on it is fascinating. Studies show that people will go to extraordinary lengths to defend their self-concept. They'll ignore contradictory evidence, they'll distort memories, they'll sacrifice their own well-being to avoid admitting they were wrong about who they are. Why? Because the brain treats threats to the self-concept as survival threats. It's not being irrational, it's doing exactly what it evolved to do. It just doesn't realize that what it's defending is a ghost. The recognition shift. So what changes when you actually see through this? And I mean really see through it, not just intellectually understand it, but experientially recognize it in real time. This is where things get interesting, because the shift isn't what most people expect. You don't become enlightened and float off into some blissful void. You don't lose the ability to function in the world. You don't forget your name or stop paying your bills. The aggregates keep aggregating. The brain keeps constructing its self-simulation. The difference is that there's a recognition, a clear seeing that the simulation is a simulation, and that recognition changes everything about how you relate to it. It's like watching a movie. When you're really engrossed, you forget you're watching projected light on a screen. You identify with characters, feel their emotions, get caught up in their struggles. But then something breaks the illusion. Maybe the film stutters or someone's phone goes off, and suddenly you remember. Oh, right, this is a movie. Your emotional engagement doesn't necessarily disappear, but it's held differently. There's less grip, less urgency, less need for things to resolve a certain way. Seeing through the self is like that. The movie of your life keeps playing, the character you call yourself keeps doing their thing, but there's a recognition that it's all a kind of play, a cosmic drama with no one really there to play it. And paradoxically, this recognition doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it lighter, freer, less burdened by the constant need to defend and improve a protagonist who was never real to begin with. The neuroscience here is preliminary but suggestive. Studies of long-term meditators show decreased activity in the default mode network, the brain regions most associated with self-referential thinking. It's not that the network disappears, it's that it's less constantly active, less compulsively spinning stories about me and mine. And subjectively, these practitioners report exactly what you'd expect, less suffering, not because their lives become perfect, but because they've stopped making everything personal. The practical application. Let's bring this down to ground level with some concrete examples, because I want you to see how this understanding can shift real-life situations. Imagine you're about to give a presentation and you're feeling anxious. The conventional approach is to try to manage the anxiety. Take deep breaths, visualize success, tell yourself positive affirmations. And sure, these can help temporarily, but they're all based on the assumption that there's a you who has anxiety and needs to get rid of it. Now, apply the aggregates understanding. What's actually happening? Your body is experiencing sensations, increased heart rate, shallow breathing, tension in the chest. That's the physical aggregate. There are unpleasant feelings arising, the automatic sense that this state is uncomfortable. That's the feeling aggregate. Your mind is interpreting these sensations as anxiety and creating a story about what they mean. I'm not prepared, I'm going to mess up, people will judge me. That's the perception and mental formations aggregates. And there's awareness of all this happening. That's the consciousness aggregate. But where in all that is the you who's anxious? Look closely. You'll find sensations, interpretations, stories, but no separate entity experiencing them. There's just the experiencing itself happening through these 5 categories, with the brain adding a narrator that doesn't actually exist. When you see this clearly, something remarkable happens. The anxiety doesn't necessarily disappear. The body might still be activated, the thoughts might still be spinning, but the identification with it loosens. It's not I am anxious, it's anxiety is occurring. It's not I need to fix this, it's this is how conditions are manifesting right now. And that shift, subtle as it sounds, makes an enormous difference in how overwhelming the experience feels. Or take something like chronic pain. People suffering from chronic pain often experience a phenomenon psychologists call pain catastrophizing. The mind spinning elaborate stories about what the pain means, how bad it's going to get, how it's ruining everything. And studies show that pain catastrophizing often causes more suffering than the physical pain itself. The aggregates understanding provides a different approach. Yes, there are unpleasant physical sensations. That's the form aggregate. Yes, there's an automatic unpleasant feeling tone. That's the feeling aggregate. But all the stories about what it means, all the fears about the future, all the why me narratives, those are mental formations, patterns of thinking that can be observed without being identified with. Pain is pain. Suffering is what happens when you add resistance to pain, when you make it about a self who shouldn't have to experience this, who needs it to stop, who can't handle it. Take away that identification and something fascinating happens. The pain might still be there, but the suffering around it can dramatically decrease. This isn't theoretical. This is the basis of mindfulness-based pain management programs that have shown real clinical effectiveness. The relationship revolution. One of the most profound shifts that happens when you see through the self-illusion is in how you relate to other people. Because if your self is a construction, so is everyone else's. And suddenly, a lot of interpersonal conflict starts to look very different. Think about an argument with someone you love. Usually what happens is that both people get locked into defending their positions, their interpretations, their sense of being right. Both people are essentially trying to protect their self-concepts from threat. And the more threatened the self-concept feels, the more rigidly defensive people become. But what if you could see in real time that what's actually happening is 2 brains running self-simulations that have generated conflicting narratives about reality? What if you could recognize that the person you're arguing with isn't some fixed entity who's wrong or bad, but a process, a collection of aggregates that's been conditioned by their entire history to respond this way in this moment? This recognition doesn't mean you have to agree with them or accept harmful behavior, but it shifts the quality of the engagement from personal combat to something more like 2 weather systems intersecting. There's still friction, still conflict, but it's not about 2 selves battling for supremacy. It's just conditions playing out according to their nature. And here's what's really interesting. When you stop defending a self, other people often stop attacking. So much of interpersonal conflict is fueled by escalation. I defend, you attack, I attack back, you defend harder. But if one person drops out of that cycle, if one person stops taking things personally because they see there's no permanent person to take things personally, the whole dynamic can shift. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat. It means responding to situations with clarity instead of reactivity. It means setting boundaries without making it about protecting a fragile self. It means being able to say, that behavior isn't acceptable, without adding, because it threatens who I am. The freedom paradox. Here's the paradox at the heart of all this. The freedom you're looking for doesn't come from becoming someone better. It comes from seeing through the illusion that there's someone who needs to become better. Your whole life, you've probably been engaged in some version of self-improvement. Maybe it's career advancement, maybe it's physical fitness, maybe it's spiritual development, maybe it's therapy and healing. And I'm not saying any of those are bad. They can all be valuable. But notice the underlying assumption. There's a self that's currently inadequate and needs to be fixed, improved, perfected. What if that whole project is based on a mistake? What if the self you're trying to improve is like trying to improve your reflection in the mirror? You can make all kinds of adjustments, change your clothes, fix your hair, practice better posture, and the reflection changes accordingly. But you're never going to improve the reflection itself, because it's not a thing. It's an appearance generated by conditions. Same with the self. You can change your habits, your behaviors, your patterns of thinking. The aggregates can be influenced, conditioned, trained, but there's no underlying self that's getting better or worse. There are just changing patterns, temporary configurations, processes in flux. And recognizing this is incredibly freeing because it takes the existential pressure off. You're not fundamentally broken and in need of repair. You're not behind where you should be. You're not failing at being yourself because there is no fixed self to fail at being. There's just this moment's aggregation of experience, already complete, already whole, exactly as it is. This doesn't mean you stop growing or learning or changing. It means those things happen without the heavy burden of trying to construct a better self. They happen more naturally, more effortlessly, because they're not being driven by existential anxiety. The moment-to-moment practice. So how do you actually work with this understanding in real life? Because it's one thing to hear about it intellectually, and another thing entirely to have it shift your direct experience. The practice is deceptively simple. Notice the aggregates in real time, not as a concept, not as an idea you believe in, but as an actual observable phenomenon happening right now. As you're listening to this, can you notice the physical sensations of your body? Maybe where you're sitting or standing, the feeling of air on your skin, the subtle tension in your shoulders. That's the form aggregate, the physical basis of experience. Can you notice the feeling tone? Is this moment basically pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Don't think about it, just sense into it. That automatic quality of experience, that's the feeling aggregate, operating before thought. Can you notice perception happening? The way your mind is labeling things, categorizing them, creating meaning? Maybe you're hearing these words and your mind is thinking, I agree, or I disagree, or this is interesting, or this is confusing. That's the perception aggregate, constantly interpreting reality. Can you notice mental formations? Maybe there's an urge to check your phone, or a feeling of restlessness, or a habit of judging yourself for not understanding something immediately. These patterns, these habits, that's the mental formations aggregate, the conditioning that shapes your responses. And can you notice consciousness itself? The simple fact of being aware that any of this is happening? That's the consciousness aggregate, the knowing faculty that makes experience possible. Now here's the key question. In all of that, where's the you? Where's the experiencer separate from the experiencing? Look closely, look directly, not in your thoughts about it, but in the actual present moment experience. Is there anyone home? Or is there just experiencing happening with the brain adding a narrator after the fact? This isn't a question to answer intellectually. It's a question to investigate directly, moment by moment. And what you'll find, if you look carefully enough, is that the sense of being a separate self only arises when you stop looking. The moment you actually search for it, it vanishes like a mirage. The end of seeking. We've covered a lot of ground here, so let me bring it home. 2,500 years ago, a man sat under a tree and looked directly at his own mind. He wasn't trying to achieve anything or become anyone. He was just looking, with complete honesty, at what was actually there. And what he discovered revolutionized human understanding. The thing we spend our entire lives defending, improving, and worrying about doesn't exist the way we think it does. Modern neuroscience is confirming this through brain imaging. Psychology is confirming it through studies of ego construction. Philosophy is confirming it through careful analysis of consciousness. But you don't need any of that to see it for yourself. You just need to look directly at your own experience without the filter of belief. The self you've been so certain of, it's a process, not a thing. A verb, not a noun. A temporary arising of conditions, not a permanent entity. And the moment you see this clearly, really see it in your direct experience, something fundamental shifts. Not because you've gained something, but because you've lost an illusion that was causing suffering. You still function in the world. You still have preferences and make choices and engage with life, but it's lighter, less burdened, less defended. Because there's no one to defend. There's just life, living itself, playing out through this particular configuration of aggregates that temporarily answers to your name. And that's not a loss. It's the beginning of real freedom. The freedom to be exactly what you are, which is nothing fixed, nothing permanent, just this ever-changing flow of experience that was never yours to begin with. The aggregates will keep aggregating until the body dies. Sensations will arise and pass. Feelings will come and go. Perceptions will shift. Mental patterns will play out. Consciousness will flicker. And none of it will be you, because you were never there to begin with. Look directly, see for yourself, and discover that the end of the self is the beginning of everything else.